The Real Princess by Hans Christian Andersen, narrated by Carol Phillips. There was once a prince who wished to marry a princess, but then she must be a real princess. He travelled all over the world in hopes of finding such a lady, but there was always something wrong. Princesses he found in plenty, but whether they were real princesses, it was impossible for him to decide, for now one thing, now another, seemed to him not quite right about the ladies. At last he returned to his palace quite cast down, because he wished so much to have a real princess for his wife. One evening a fearful tempest arose. It thundered and lightened, and the rain poured down from the sky in torrents. It was as dark as pitch. All at once there was heard a violent knocking at the door, and the old king, the prince's father, went out himself to open it. It was a princess who was standing outside the door. What with the rain and the wind, she was in a sad condition. The water trickled down from her hair, and her clothes clung to her body. She said she was a real princess. "Ah, we shall soon see that," thought the old Queen Mother. However, she said not a word of what she was going to do, but went quietly into the bedroom, took all the bedclothes off the bed, and put 3 little peas on the bedstead. She then laid 20 mattresses, one upon another, over the 3 peas, and put 20 feather beds over the mattresses. Upon this bed the princess was to pass the night. The next morning she was asked how she had slept. "Oh, very badly indeed," she replied. "I have scarcely closed my eyes the whole night through. I do not know what was in my bed, but I had something hard under me, and am all over black and blue. It has hurt so much." Now it was plain that the lady must be a real princess, since she had been able to feel the 3 little peas through the 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. None but a real princess could have had such a delicate sense of feeling. The prince accordingly made her his wife, being now convinced that he had found a real princess. The 3 peas were, however, put into the cabinet of curiosities, where they are still to be seen, provided they have not been lost. Wasn't this a lady of real delicacy? A biography of Hans Christian Andersen, narrated by Carol Phillips. Hans Christian Andersen, often referred to in Scandinavia as H.C. Andersen, born 2nd of April 1805, died 4th of August 1875, was a Danish author. Although a prolific writer of plays, travelogues, novels and poems, Andersen is best remembered for his fairy tales. Andersen's popularity is not limited to children. His stories, called eventyr in Danish, express themes that transcend age and nationality. Andersen's fairy tales, of which no less than 3,381 have been translated into more than 125 languages, have become culturally embedded in the West's collective consciousness, readily accessible to children, but presenting lessons of virtue and resilience in the face of adversity for mature readers as well. Some of his most famous fairy tales include The Emperor's New Clothes, The Little Mermaid, The Nightingale, The Snow Queen, The Ugly Duckling, Thumbelina, and many others. His stories have inspired ballets, plays, and animated and live-action films. One of Copenhagen's widest and busiest boulevard is labelled H.C. Andersen's Boulevard. Early work. A very early fairy tale by Andersen, The Tallow Candle, was discovered in a Danish archive in October 2012. The story, written in the 1820s, was about a candle that did not feel appreciated. It was written while Andersen was still in school and dedicated to a benefactor in whose family's possession it remained until it turned up among other family papers in a local archive. In 1829, Andersen enjoyed considerable success with the short story A Journey on Foot from Holman's Canal to the east point of Amager. Its protagonist meets characters ranging from St. Peter to a talking cat. Andersen followed this success with a theatrical piece, Love on St. Nicholas's Church Tower, and a short volume of poems. Although he made little progress writing and publishing immediately thereafter, in 1833 he received a small travel grant from the king, thus enabling him to set out on the first of many journeys through Europe. At Jura, near Le Locle in Switzerland, Andersen wrote the story Agnieite and the Merman. He spent an evening in the Italian seaside village of Sestre Levante the same year, inspiring the title of The Bay of Fables. In October 1834, he arrived in Rome. Andersen's travels in Italy were to be reflected in his first novel, a fictionalized autobiography entitled The Improvisers, published in 1835 to instant acclaim. Fairy tales and poetry. Andersen's initial attempts at writing fairy tales were revisions of stories that he had heard as a child. Initially, his original fairy tales were not met with recognition, due partly to the difficulty of translating them. In 1835, Andersen published the first 2 installments of his fairy tales. More stories, completing the first volume, were published in 1837. The collection comprises 9 tales, including The Tinder Box, The Princess and the Pea, Thumbelina, The Little Mermaid, and The Emperor's New Clothes. The quality of these stories was not immediately recognised, and they sold poorly. At the same time, Andersen enjoyed more success with 2 novels, O.T., published 1836, and Only a Fiddler, published 1837. The latter work was reviewed by a young Søren Kierkegaard. After a visit to Sweden in 1837, Andersen became inspired by Scandinavism and committed himself to writing a poem that would convey the relatedness of Swedes, Danes, and Norwegians. In July 1839, during a visit to the island of Funen, Andersen wrote the text of his poem Jeg en Skandinav, I am a Scandinavian, to capture, quote, the beauty of the Nordic spirit, the way the 3 sister nations have gradually grown together, end quote, as part of a Scandinavian national anthem. Composer Otto Lindblad set the poem to music, and the composition was published in January 1840. Its popularity peaked in 1845, after which it was seldom sung. Andersen returned to the fairy tale genre in 1838 with another collection, Fairy Tales Told for Children, new collection, first booklet, which consists of The Daisy, The Steadfast Tin Soldier, and The Wild Swans. 1845 saw a breakthrough for Andersen with the publication of 4 translations of his fairy tales. The Little Mermaid appeared in the periodical Bentley's Miscellany, followed by a second volume, Wonderful Stories for Children. 2 other volumes enthusiastically received were A Danish Storybook and Danish Fairy Tales and Legends. A review that appeared in the London journal The Athenaeum in February 1846 said of Wonderful Stories, "This is a book full of life and fancy, a book for grandfathers no less than grandchildren, not a word of which will be skipped by those who have it once in hand." Andersen would continue to write fairy tales and publish them in instalments until 1872.